Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. With this one, my friends, I'm gonna be testing a GeForce RTX 4060 in God of War Ragnarök. This one is the MSI Ventus version of the card. We are running it with the latest Nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Up's GPU. Resizable bar is also enabled there. And over on the left, I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D with half of its cores disabled, which makes it pretty much the same as a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which is extremely overkill for an RTX 4060, but as long as you don't bottleneck the card, you're gonna see the same FPS. Finally, on the memory tab, I'm using 32GB of DDR5, 6000MHz CL30 in dual channel, and let's get right into it, shall we? And here we have it, guys. We're getting 80s, 90s. This is pretty good. It's looking great as well. If you had to guess, what settings am I utilizing here? Do you think this is ultra settings, high settings, medium settings, low settings? I mean, it's getting very high FPS, so you probably already know it's not on ultra, but it looks very good to me. Let's go over the settings right now. I'm playing at 1080p to start this off, utilizing DLSS set to DLAA, so it's native resolutions, just applying the DL anti-aliasing. And I'm utilizing the medium settings preset, which is actually what it defaulted to with the RTX 4060 and also with the 7900 XTX at 4K. Maybe it just always defaults to medium settings. And VRAM, as you can see down there, already says 98%. That's pretty weird because it's not utilizing anywhere near 98% of our VRAM. It's only using 6-something gigabytes, or allocating 6-something gigabytes, and the usage is actually at 5.3. But anyways, I'll keep it on medium settings for now. We're also going to test it on high and ultra later. And the only thing I changed was this right here, film grain and motion blur. I disabled those two things, and that's it. So I'm gonna start counting our FPS, and it's looking absolutely phenomenal, this game, at medium settings. I really enjoy its visuals, actually. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab the boat and go to a little bit more intensive of an area than this one. Over where we started with the RX 7900 XTX video is where it dropped the most, at least so far in my benchmarking. So let's go over here. Water looks great. By the way, the reason why I'm not using TAA, which looks pretty decent in this game still, set to native resolution, is because the water looks a lot better at 1080p resolution with DLAA than it does with TAA, and DLAA only runs with a couple of FPS lower than TAA does. So it's very similar in terms of performance. It's not like the FSR 3.1 anti-aliasing that drops our FPS by quite a lot, like 5 to 8 frames per second compared to TAA. So yeah, that's why I chose to play with TAA with the 7900 XTX. Also at higher resolutions, the shimmering on the water isn't too noticeable with TAA anyways. It's just at 1080p, you're better off utilizing DLAA with an RTX GPU that supports DLAA. Anyway, around here, you saw that it dropped a little bit inside of that cavern thingy. Not a problem though, it's still providing us with very decent FPS. I mean, it's well above 60 frames all of the time, and this is great performance from an RTX 4060, I would say. It's just a nice experience, guys. I really, really enjoy it. It's a breath of fresh air as well compared to other experiences that we've had with recent titles, especially UE5 games and so on. Yeah, this is nothing like that. It's actually well optimized. So if you can look past the terrible idea of having a PSN account to be able to play a single-player title like this one, yes, guys, you require a PSN account for this. Yeah, well, it's a great game. After that, I just wish they didn't make you create a freaking PSN account. I had to create one because I don't really have one, you know. I'm gonna stop it right there, guys. We got 88 FPS average, 72.1% lows. Turns out over here it's actually as intensive as that town area, and sometimes it does drop down into the lower 80s, but it's not for long, and it works absolutely flawlessly, basically, this game with the 4060 here. So it's good to see that a mid-range GPU can still provide great experiences here. Anyway, we can enable frame generation if you're not happy with the experience here, and there's FSR FG with FSR 3.1, of course, as well as DLSS FG, which is the one you should utilize if you have an RTX GPU, I guess. And from what I've seen, both of them will work just fine, of course. But, wow. It's giving us less FPS. What? Do I need to restart the game for it to work or what? Why is it getting lower FPS with frame generation? Doesn't make sense. What the heck is going on with DLSS FG in this game? Let's try FSR FG. Maybe that works a bit better? Yeah, FSR FG is working, but DLSS FG isn't.
Okay, so...
Huh. That's very interesting. I've never seen a game where FSR FG was actually better than Nvidia's own FG, but in this one it seems like it's bugged or something. I don't know if it's the 4060's fault. Actually, it's probably not the 4060's fault, it's the game's fault. They didn't implement the DLSS FG properly, but FSR FG is working, and I guess that's the most important FG of them all, because it also allows other RTX GPUs, and also Radeon RX GPUs as well, of course, to take advantage of that frame generation, which is great in this game, actually. There is a little bit of shimmering sometimes whenever you enable it. It's not noticeable at all at higher resolutions, but here at 1080p, I can see maybe there's a little bit more shimmering on the water than there was before. It's barely noticeable, guys. If you want a high refresh rate experience, go with these settings. It works absolutely fine. As you can see, it doesn't go over the 8 gigabytes of VRAM apparently. It's allocating 7 and it's using 6, and it was at like 7.5 allocated VRAM a little bit earlier into the benchmark run near the town area. So yeah, it shouldn't really go over 8 gigabytes. Now, I could use some quality DLSS as well, but I don't really feel the need to, so let's just move on with this. And I'll try it at 1440p next. For that, I'll actually need to restart the game, because it has no full screen mode. Alright, here we have it, guys. 1440p resolution using DLAA here, and the same medium settings, alright? And as you can see, it's still getting 60s, even here in this town area. This is actually pretty damn good, so I'm just gonna start counting our FPS. There's still no need to use DLSS Quality, for example, and if you want a higher refresh rate experience, it might be possible still with FSR FG, guys. That's crazy. Wow, and it still looks amazing, of course, because it's still medium settings. Obviously, Ultra looks better, but there's not that big of a difference, honestly, between medium and Ultra settings. I actually tried medium settings for about half an hour, playing the first part of the game with the 7900 XTX, and it looked just fine to me on medium settings at 4K resolution, and then I swapped it to Ultra settings. I turned it up to Ultra, and yes, it did look a little bit better, but it's not game-changing, honestly. Now, around here, it seems like it drops the most inside of this cavern area. It does dip down into the 50s, unfortunately, so that native 1440p experience is not going to be possible, and if you disable DLAA and use TAA, expect like 2 more FPS, still going to drop into the 50s anyways. So, with that said, I think we should probably stop it right there. It is a good experience, but it's not the most stable thing, unfortunately. Now, for that, there are a couple of options, of course. You could lower it down to low, but no, let's not do that. And of course, you could use quality DLSS or use frame gen. Let's try quality DLSS first. And here, it gives us pretty much the same FPS as native 1080p resolution with DLAA. Although the water might look a little bit worse right now than 1440p. The reflections on the water especially, they're pretty low res, and you can notice that. But aside from that, as you can see, even here in this cavern area, it's not dropping from 60 FPS, guys. And it's looking fantastic still with this lighting. I really like the graphics here. So DLSS on quality is definitely very usable here at the 1440p resolution. It's just the water that looks a little bit worse right now, but not to the point where it matters. I think I would still pick this over native 1440p because The detail is pretty much the same everywhere else aside from the water, and you do get those 60 plus 100% of the time. And by the way, I haven't really seen the game get way more intensive when fighting bosses and stuff like that with a lot of effect. It seems to be very well optimized in that regard as well. Now, I have a question to you guys. Should I continue with the story? Like, I think we will go in that direction into a very closed area. We're gonna get 100 plus FPS. I don't think that's a good benchmark, so I'm just gonna keep on walking around here, seeing different settings in this little scenario. That's what I don't like about these linear titles. I can't really go everywhere I want to go, and I'm a little bit stuck in a very closed path where we can't even kill Bob or see Jack, unfortunately. Let's stop it right there, guys, and I am going to try it now without DLSS, so DLAA, back to native, over there, and with the frame generation enabled at 1440p, and I'm curious to see if it will swap some things that should be on VRAM into the RAM, because it runs out of VRAM, I guess. FG does utilize a bit more VRAM than native resolution, you know. So I'm just gonna start counting the frames. We're up into the 90s. We gained quite a bit of performance compared to native resolution. At native, remember, it was getting like 60 to 70 over here. Now, in terms of input lag, I can actually notice it. Wait a second. Maybe it didn't enable the frame latency reduction. Yeah, it didn't. It only does that if you set the DLSS FG. It doesn't do it automatically if you use FSR FG. So be sure to turn this on. Reflex is enough. Reflex plus boost is not really needed, although it gives you slightly lower input lags, but then the GPU usage won't be at 99%. So let's enable reflex, and here we go. Back at it. Input lags are a little bit better now. Kind of stuttered a little bit there, or skipped some frames, I don't know. But yeah, it's working now. Down into the 70s, 80s. I'm seeing a little bit of ghosting, actually, in these darker scenarios with FG enabled. So a bit of artifacting happening, but it's hard to notice. I doubt you can actually see it on YouTube, so it's fine, guys. It stays above 70 FPS all of the time, I guess. The water is looking a little bit better once again than it did on quality DLSS in 1440p. So I guess I would pick this over native resolution at 1440p and over DLSS quality at 1440p as well. I think for a single player title, I wouldn't mind the little added input lag, which is not a lot here whenever you have reflex enabled, and yeah, just enjoy those 70 plus FPS or 75 plus FPS all of the time with these settings. It's gonna work just fine. It's gonna look slightly sharper, slightly better on the water as well than the DLSS quality. All right, so I'm gonna stop it there for 1440p. Should we try some 4K as well at the medium settings? I guess I'm gonna do that because it might be playable at like performance DLSS, and it's probably going to look good still. All right, here we go. 4K resolution. I'll leave reflex on here because the FPS are pretty low and it improves input lag. DLSS set to DLAA. I guess I'm gonna use TAA here because at 4K it gets a little bit more intensive with DLAA, and any extra frames are welcome. And over here, medium settings still. Guys, what was the last time, or when was the last time that I tried the RTX 4060 at 4K medium settings native res in a recent title above 30 FPS? And especially one that looks like this, right? Tons and tons of detail here on medium settings. Oh my god. Dude, people say, Black Myth Wukong is so amazing in terms of graphics and stuff, so of course it runs terribly. But come on, like this doesn't look as good, maybe technically speaking, as Black Myth Wukong, but I mean, I can see more detail, I think. The lighting in Wukong is better, but come on. It shouldn't be that much more intensive than this one, right? And that game was getting, what, like 20 FPS, if I remember correctly, at 4K native resolution with a 4060. Now, it still drops down into the 20s here in worst case scenarios, unfortunately, but I mean, I'm fine with that. Not that I would play like this, which drops into the 20s, but I'm happy with the performance that we're getting at 4K resolution here, okay? So now I'm gonna use Quality DLSS and check it out. It's swapped to 1440p internal resolution. Ooh, lots of flickering in the water, guys. Although our FPS are way higher right now. Yeah, now I can definitely notice the degradation in the water. It's very noticeable. Basically, everywhere else in the image is great with Quality DLSS, but the water, I'm curious to see the FSR 3.1 implementation with quality setting right here. It's not as shimmering, I think. It's still shimmering, but it's not as shimmering. Although it is softer, though. Not gonna lie. Yeah, it's a little bit softer than native resolution and Quality DLSS as well. I didn't really notice much of a difference compared to DLAA with Quality FSR 3.1 with the 7900 XTX, but here, side by side, I saw a little bit of pixelation, but that was about it. It's still a very good implementation, and it is very close to DLSS, and in the water, I would say it's even better than DLSS. Like, yeah, it's a little bit pixelated, it's still shimmering, but it's not as shimmery, I think, right? I'm gonna try that again, okay? Let's go to DLSS Quality. Now maybe it's the same. Now, okay, while moving, DLSS shimmers more, and if you're standing by, FSR shimmers more. That's it. I want to try Performance DLSS instead of Quality DLSS. Okay, yeah, that's a lot more shimmering on the water. But it's just the water. Like, if you can look past the water, or if you just play like this, look at how good that looks. No shimmering, no ghosting, no nothing. It's really detailed still. It looks like a 4K resolution image, honestly, looking at it from here. Let's see it inside of this tunnel area, though, at 4K with Performance DLSS. Still drops from 60 FPS, yeah, into the mid-50s, I guess. Worst case scenario. Not too bad. Still above 60 FPS most of the time inside. All right. I like it, guys. All right, so now I restarted the game and we're at 1080p resolution using DLAA again, so native, and the high preset. And I'm gonna test high as well as ultra at 1080p resolution. I'm not gonna touch the higher resolutions because at 1440 you should stick to medium. At 4K as well, I think my mouse is not working. They probably made this with controllers in mind, so sometimes the mouse just stops working randomly. I'm gonna have to quit the game. Anyway, not sure if I went through the settings already, but it's at 1080p, DLAA using high settings, and we are getting 70 plus FPS right now in this city area with a lot of details. That is pretty impressive still, guys. Now, I'm not gonna test 1440p and 4K anymore in this video, because medium is adequate for that resolution, but at 1080p resolution, you might want to play with high settings instead of medium. The major change that I see coming from medium to high is that there's no shadow pop-in. Previously, it wasn't really pop-in, it was just the render distance of the shadows wasn't too high, so far away shadows would look lower resolution, and then when you got closer, they would pop in. So maybe it is pop in at a higher resolution, okay? And now they're just at a higher resolution all the way through, I think. I'm not really seeing any shadow pop-in issues. Yeah, it's just great experience overall, once again. Could it be better? Yes, especially given that high doesn't look that different from medium, you know? So you're dropping quite a lot of performance going from medium to high, around like 10 FPS, maybe 20 FPS at times. But it's not the end of the world, guys. If you want to keep that high settings fidelity, you can with this GPU. It just works, like Jensen said. But it was about ray tracing. By the way, I am very happy that this doesn't have ray tracing. Whenever it has ray tracing, it just gets wrecked. You don't need ray tracing to make a game look great. Now, enabling frame generation, of course, puts us in the 100 FPS mark. It's going to drop a little bit, probably into the 80s in the cavern area, but yeah, as you can see, VRAM isn't an issue on high still with frame generation. The water still looks great with FG enabled as well. Maybe a little bit more shimmery, but that's it. It's not really that big of a difference, honestly. And FPS are high now, you can take advantage of your high refresh rate panels. Not as high, of course, as it was with FG plus medium settings at 1080p, but it's good enough to where input lag doesn't really matter. It feels and looks amazing. And if you don't want to drop that 1 FPS into the 50s and get 59 FPS in worst case scenarios, well, enable FG, it's going to work just fine and it's going to be buttery smooth all of the time. But let's go back to no FG and let's play on Ultra. By the way, it says that we're running out of VRAM here, so in some areas of the game you might see a bit of a drop-off in performance because of high settings, mainly high textures, but let's see it on Ultra. It actually lowered down the VRAM utilization as I applied it. So I'm gonna return to the main menu and get back to the game again so it can reload all of the textures and so on. And thankfully this time the mouse didn't stop working. And we're getting 60 to 70 frames per second over in this area, so you already know it's going to drop a lot in the cavern area and in some other areas of the game, of course. Although it's still smooth, it's still playable, and especially if you play with the controller, you might not even notice the drops into the 50s, although I think it might actually drop into the 40s this time around in the cavern. 56, 57... It seems to be dropping to about the same values as high settings did. Okay, no, there we go. Now it's dropping a lot more into the lower 50s. It touched 50 FPS. But still, it's not that huge drop-off in performance inside of the cave that I was thinking it would be. Didn't drop into the 40s after all. So much more intensive on Ultra, but it still looks very good on medium, so I would just stick to medium or high at 1080p native resolution and have fun like that. However, if you really want the ultra fidelity, it might be possible to have that with the frame generation, so let's see if we can get the best of both worlds, high visual fidelity and high FPS at the same time. It went from 50 something to 94, I think. I think it was dropping into the 50s here, I'm not sure though. Let's go see it inside of that area, the cave. And this is the moment of truth, guys. Can you play on ultra settings with 60 plus FPS all of the time at 1080p resolution, the target resolution for the RTX 4060? I think it can, like, we're getting 90 plus right now. I don't think it will drop down from even 75 FPS. Look at that over here. Looking back, 87, 86. Not bad. I'm gonna move the other way around as well just to see it. But it is stable, input lag is completely fine. We're getting those extra frames, it feels smoother. Guys, I think I would play like this. I mean, again, there's no problem in playing on medium settings and native resolution if you don't like frame generation, but now we're getting the advantage of that ultra settings preset. And some things do look a little bit better. I think the lighting here also looks slightly better as well. 83, 84, yeah, that's the lowest. Doesn't even drop into the 70s. That's insane. That's really good. It could possibly run out of VRAM at some point in the game. You know, if you keep playing it for like half an hour with these settings, it could slow down over time because of that frame buffer not being big enough. And as I said in my 7900 XTX video, I saw it peaking at 17 gigabytes of allocated VRAM at one point and around 16 of actual usage, 15 to 16. So yeah, it just keeps on going and eating more and more VRAM. But the thing is, it might have swapped some things into the RAM already and it wasn't even noticeable because the RAM usage went up, right, since we started it. So there's that. If it's just swaps things and it's not noticeable and it doesn't kill our FPS, you could play like this absolutely fine. And that's been it for this one, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope it wasn't too boring because I didn't really progress into the story. I preferred to show it to you in an intensive area, beautiful area as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what kind of videos you'd like me to do next, like play through the story, no matter what kind of FPS we get, no matter if we go into a very closed area like that and get 100 FPS more than what we're getting right now, because I am enjoying the story so far, so I don't really mind to keep playing it here, but I guess I could also be spoiling some things, so that's also bad. It's always a really big dilemma here whenever I am playing linear titles. But yeah, hope you enjoy. Leave a comment down below. Catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.